Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. Yeah!
Hi, welcome to the Pool Guy Podcast Show. In this episode, I'm going to talk to you about large pool care, the differences between a large pool versus a regular or medium-sized pool, and some things to note if you're going to take on these larger bodies of water on your pool route. If you're looking to expand your pool service or get support out in the field, or if you just want one-on-one coaching, join my coaching program with over 270 members and growing. Learn more at poolguycoaching.com. If you do commercial pool service, apartment complexes, HOAs, it's hard to avoid the big pools. Now, there are some communities with a smaller pool. These can also be problematic because they're a small body of water, but they get heavily used, so they may fall into the same category, or you may have the same dilemma taking care of a medium-sized pool in a commercial service account. But I'm talking about residential pools that are very large. Now, what's a large pool? Well, it differs by area, and I think in Texas, a large pool may be different than a large pool in California, but I would consider anything over about 25,000 gallons a large pool. Anything from 20 to 25,000 gallons is pretty big in itself, but when you go over 25,000 gallons, you're getting into what I consider the large pool category, and there are different problems that arise with the large pool. The first problem is that everything is going to be more expensive for the customer with a large pool, and they may not necessarily be able to afford this extra expense. Sometimes they buy a house, there's a large pool back there. I remember I was looking at this house around my area. I was just at an open house just for fun. It was an old house and we wanted to see the inside. I think it was built around 1900. It was a pretty fascinating design inside. It had like a circular sitting area. It was really nice and had really old floors. But then when I got to the backyard, I was really surprised at how gigantic the pool was. Well, not particularly surprised, but I was kind of surprised because I didn't know the backyard was this big in this property. But it had one of those pools from the 70s. It was just a rectangular pool. It used to have a diving board. I could see they cut the bolts off and they cut the diving board off of there. It's a good idea. It was probably too old anyway to be functioning. And it was, I think, about 12 feet deep. It was about a 30,000 gallon pool. And I thought to myself, well, whoever buys this house is going to have their hands full because it had undersized equipment. It was a gigantic pool. And it's something that you have to consider that maybe they don't have the money or the resources to maintain that large pool as you would wish them to. So that's a component of large pool care that you have to be aware of, that sometimes when you're asking for upgrades or doing different things or shocking the pool or asking to maybe put a bigger salt system in, it's really an expense they may not be able to afford because they inherited this large pool. Now, I've had customers, and this is rare, but I've had them downsize their pool. It's a pretty expensive project. They drain the pool, they have a builder come out there, and they actually fill in part of the pool, reshape it. Sometimes it looks entirely different, but that's one way to kind of counter a pool that's just too big. But of course, it costs a lot of money to do that, so it's kind of counterintuitive to reduce the pool down. I would just say live with the large pool and maintain it. So it's also one of those things where it uses more water, it's going to use more resources if you're going to heat it, and it's going to require more chemicals. Here's where it gets kind of interesting for the pool service provider. If you're taking care of a large pool and you're just quoting based on your route, you don't change your rates based on pool size, which you should kind of upcharge for a larger pool. You shouldn't really downcharge too much for a smaller pool, but you can if it's like a pool you can jump across, you can give them a lower rate. But for a large pool, you're going to be adding more muriatic acid. You're going to be adding more of the maintenance dose of the chlorine if that's what you include in your service. And then when the pool turns or something happens to the pool, which could happen, I've had many times where I've had a large pool, 30,000 gallons, where they have an attached spa and they leave it in spa mode over the weekend. I get there like on a Wednesday and the pool looks really bad. And it's going to take twice as much shock as you would for a medium-sized pool. It'll also take twice as long for that pool to clear up, and it may look really bad for a longer period of time because of the large body of water. They need to be filtered through what I consider a standard filtration system. Very few large pools have the filter capacity or a large enough filter, in my opinion. A lot of times there's room to put a dual filter in, and I recommend that for a pad where you have a large pool to put two filters in. That way you can accommodate that large pool and have the right filtration. and it's going to require more filter cleanings if you have a standard size filter. So all of that adds into a higher cost for service as the provider. And you can, of course, misquote this a lot, and you can kind of try to get the account, especially if you're new and you're trying to get accounts. You're going to probably misquote this pool and realize that it's taking a lot of your time and resources, and that's going to really drain your business down. So if you're going to do a large pool, 25,000 gallons or larger, I would say maybe in California, 20,000 gallons or larger would be considered a large pool here. You'd have to charge more for that large pool because it's going to cost more to maintain that large pool. Another problem is the debris accumulation in a large pool, which means that if there's trees around there and you have a large surface area for water, you're going to have more debris in that pool. It's kind of weird. It's one of those things where you may not think this is the truth, but it is actually. So let's say you had a 15,000 gallon pool, a 15 by 30 pool in the backyard, and then you had a windstorm and leaves fall in there. You would think that a 40 by 30 pool, a large pool, would have the same amount of debris in there, but it would have more debris because there's more surface area. Basically, the leaves that would fall onto the deck or cement or grass area in a 15,000 gallon pool won't fall into the pool because it's falling on the grass deck area. But if you have a larger pool, that grass and deck area is the pool itself. And so leaves that would normally fall into the deck and grass area around a 15,000 gallon pool will fall directly into a 30,000 gallon pool, making it a real problem because you have twice as much debris now in that pool, a much bigger surface area. And so if you're cleaning that pool up after a windstorm, it's going to take you a lot longer because there is more debris in that pool. If you think about it, it makes a lot of sense, and you're going to have to adjust for that as well. Because if you're spending a lot of time cleaning the surface, which is typical of a large pool, even when it's not windy, when you don't have a windstorm, but if there's trees around and stuff falls in there, you're actually going to be spending a lot more time skimming that pool than a small pool. And it's not just because it's bigger, it's because more debris falls in there because it's bigger. It's one of those things where you don't think about it, but it's the truth. If you have large pools on your route, you know what I'm talking about. A lot more debris takes you a lot longer because you have to walk further along the pool. There's a bigger area to skim. Sometimes you're using your leaf rake in the center of the pool, where if you had a small pool, you wouldn't have to do that. So it is more energy, more time, and it does wear you out more when you have a large pool where you're skimming it. Now, vacuuming a large pool also takes longer because there's more surface area logically. Even with a vacuum system, if you had a 15,000 gallon pool, you could probably vacuum that thing out with the Riptide in about 4 minutes. If you have a 30,000 gallon pool, well, 8 or 10 minutes, and that adds up to a lot of time. And of course, if there's more debris, you have to go slower, and that's going to cause you more time. So basically, everything is multiplied in a large pool. The time skimming, the time vacuuming, the amount of debris that falls in there, and the amount of chemicals that you're going to have to add to turn that pool around. The runtime has to be longer, so it's going to cost the customer more and more energy, and their more electricity, so their energy bills will be higher. So it just adds and multiplies, and everything is kind of doubled. And this is where you have to look at the rate you're charging. If you're charging $180 for a 15,000 gallon pool, and you have a 30,000 gallon pool on your route, I mean, logically you can double that, but I don't think a lot of customers would pay that, but you can get close to that and make sure that you're getting paid for the time you're putting in there, and you're not shorting yourself by bidding a large pool the same as a regular pool. Because a lot of things I talked about just now, you can think and see that you're going to spend a lot more time there, a lot more energy, a lot more thought goes into a large pool too. You have to really consider, how much chemicals to add to the pool, how to maintain that pool, how to balance that pool, how long to run the filter, how often you have to clean the filter. And it's not as easy as just, okay, it has more water, it's a bigger pool, I'll bid it up a little bit to cover for that. But there's a lot more effort on your part to maintain that large pool as well. Let me give you some tips now on maintaining these larger bodies of water and some ways to make it easier. I think the first thing to address is the runtime and the filtration. If you find that you're doing a 30,000 gallon pool, a 35,000 gallon pool, and let's say it has a 60 square foot D filter, you're going to have nothing but problems, and you're going to have to clean this filter probably every other month. It's going to be just like a commercial account at that point. And I've had pools like this that were extremely large with small filters, and this is the problem. One thing I recommend is to look at the equipment to see if you can add a second filter, or at the least, upgrade it to the largest cartridge filter you can put in there. There are some cartridge filters now that you can get that are over 600 square feet. I definitely would recommend those, and I would think that would help a lot tremendously in some cases to have that large filter. You can add it there. Two filters come to mind here, and service pros may not even be aware that they have these cartridge filters this size. Hayward has a commercial HCF cartridge filter. It's the HCF 7030C, and this is a 700 square foot cartridge filter. It's quite tall, so if you're going to install it in an area where there's a block wall or a fence blocking the equipment, it'll probably stick over that, or if you're in an equipment room, it's going to be pretty high up. You have to make sure you get that lid off, but it's an option that's there. It is probably one of the largest cartridge filters you can install in the backyard. Pentair has the Full Flow XF C620, and this is a 620 square foot cartridge filter. A little bit smaller than the Hayward, but maybe easier to clean because it just has 4 large cartridges. The Hayward commercial filter has a kind of dual stacked filter system. So it's one of those things where you can put in a large filter. It's going to help tremendously. Now, I'm not a big fan of sand filters, but if you have an area where you can put the largest sand filter you can purchase, it may be more efficient to have that gigantic, 500-pound sand filter there versus a cartridge filter, depending on the area that this pool is in. But again, I'm not a big fan of the sand filters. I'd rather you put in a large cartridge filter like the Hayward HCF 7030C or the Full Flow XF C620 filter, because I prefer cartridge filters. I think it's going to be effective and efficient, especially if you can't put in 2 filters side by side. I prefer this setup. I think this is probably the best way to do it, if it's possible, to put 2 filters in tandem. And I used to do this very large pool, about 35,000 gallons, that had 2 Pentair 520 square foot cartridge filters side by side. That's 1,000 square foot of filtration area. This pool really never had any problems, and it's one of those things where the filtration is the key to maintaining these large pools. It is probably the number one factor in if you're going to have a struggle with this pool or if the pool is going to look great. Now, the runtime, of course, is almost 24 hours. I would say 24 hours would be optimal, but for a large pool, you can run at 23 hours on a variable speed pump, and the customer is going to know that it's going to save them some electricity cost, but it's still going to cost more to run the pump longer for a larger pool. I would not run a large pool pump time on the same as a 15,000 gallon pool. You want to run this pool a lot longer because it's a larger body of water and you want to keep it circulating. Again, treat it a lot like a commercial pool because it essentially is a commercial pool at the size that you have this body of water, and you're going to need to run the pool pump as long as possible to maintain clear quality and clear water. I don't recommend this often, using enhancers in tandem or chlorine enhancers in tandem, but I would recommend using a combination of enhancers to maintain this large body of water. Now, you can use all 3 if you want, and it'll make your job a lot easier, but I would definitely recommend enzymes and phosphates, borates to 50 parts per million, and then the Pool RX in this particular account, so that you have kind of a trifecta of enhancers, so you won't have any problems with this large body of water. You also will reduce the chemical usage of this large body of water. And if there's a problem like a customer leaving in spa mode for 3 or 4 days, the pool's not going to turn in most cases, and you're going to have a really pleasant arrival when there is a problem like this. You're not going to freak out and have to be brushing the pool for 30 minutes to clear up the algae. I'll give you a practical example of this. The 35,000 gallon pool I was taking care of with the tandem filters had a party, and it was in the winter time, and they kind of decided, well, not quite winter, it was probably late September, early October. It was still quite warm out. The water was still fairly warm, but they had heated this pool to about 95 degrees, which cost a fortune, by the way, but they did this for the pool party for one of their grandkids, and they didn't tell me this was happening. They didn't tell me they're having a pool party in October. And when I got to the pool, this was on a Saturday, I got there on a Tuesday, the water was still at 95 degrees because they didn't turn off the heater. The chlorine was actually at 0. This is something that I was like, okay, this is not good. The good news was that I had 2 blue Polar X units in there. I had each one in each pump basket because it had actually dual pumps and dual filters. The other secondary pump was for a secondary return line and the secondary skimmer. And then the first one was for the primary filter or primary filtration system. It was a great setup, and it's one of those things I recommend having. 2 skimmers, of course, in a large pool. That's also helpful, but it's also helpful to have the 2 filters and the 2 systems and 2 pumps sometimes to circulate the water better. So this one had the perfect setup, which I'm glad it had that, but the PoolRx really helped. And I also was using enzyme and phosphates in this pool to keep scum from building up and to keep the phosphates out because there's a lot of plants around the pool, planter areas. And this combination, I think, saved me because the 2 Blue PoolRx units, the phosphate and enzyme treatment I was using, really helped the fact that it zeroed out, but it didn't have any algae in the pool. I quickly shocked it. I also texted the customer, hey, you want me to turn the heater off? They're like, oh, yeah, turn it off. And the party was on the weekend. Forgot to turn off the heater. And then that pool was beautiful because if it didn't have the 2 Blue PoolRx units or I was using enzyme and phosphates in the pool, I would have been brushing that pool probably for half an hour, shocking it, treating the algae, cleaning the filter. But because I had the chlorine enhancers in there, it really saved the day. So I recommend for a large pool to use borates of 50 parts per million, PoolRx, and a combination of phosphate and enzymes. And you're really going to lower the chemical usage and prevent yourself from really spending a lot of time there trying to turn this pool around if there's a problem that happens during the week when you're not there. If you're looking for other podcasts I recorded, you can find those on my website, swimmingpoollearning.com. Just click on the podcast icon on the banner. That'll take you to a drop-down menu of over 1,500 podcasts. And again, if you're interested in the coaching program that I offer, you can learn more at poolguycoaching.com. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Have a good rest of your week, and God bless. Real quick, if you're not using pool service software, try Skimmer free for 30 days at getskimmer.com/poolguy. Again, that's getskimmer.com/poolguy. Skimmer, everything you need to run your pool service business all in one app. This episode is brought to you by HASA, providing products that deliver clean, healthy water for every aspect of everyday life. The bottom feeder battery-powered vacuum system, portable, powerful, and only weighs 12 pounds. And Skimmer. Get Skimmer, America's #1 pool service software. Podcast listeners can try Skimmer for free at getskimmer.com/poolguy.